Okay. Hello, everybody. Yeah. Okay. It's been a long day, I guess. We've seen a lot. There's been a lot to absorb, and we are now all that stands between you and beer. And I'm very aware of that, believe me. So we've been given lots of time here to have a chat about mobile browser stuff, which is great. But we don't need to necessarily use up all the time. If we decide we need to go for beer sooner rather than later, we'll do that. And the way we'll decide that is that at some point I'm going to open up this to you guys, to the audience, and if you have lots of questions, stuff for a while. And if you guys don't have many questions, then we're going to go drink beer instead. So it's basically up to you. And if things do start to get boring, let us know. By going something like boring, right? That will be a good cue that things are getting boring. Okay. So I know somebody asked this earlier, but let me ask again. Who was here last year? All right, a good few. So you know the score, basically, with the panel. We have some representatives from browsers up here, and I try my best to get some straight answers out of them, and usually fail, because they all like keeping their jobs and things like that. But we're hoping to get some straight talk out of these guys. We have a new representative this year joining us, and that's Arnaud from Google. There was some bad timing last year, which was Mobilism last year clashed with Google I/O. And I think that's the reason why Google didn't send any Android representatives. It would be lovely, again, to have Apple on this panel. We do not have anybody from Apple on this panel. Apple never sent anybody to any of these events. That's a shame. Maybe that's something we could discuss later. We'll see. But that's just the way things are. And by the way, say hello to everybody on the internet, because this is all being live streamed right now. Say hello, internet. Lovely. So everyone's sitting at home watching this. They can all join in the fun. So rather than me introducing everybody here, I think I'll get them to introduce themselves and very briefly say what they're up to. So Arnaud, seeing as you're the noob, why don't you tell me who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Arnaud Weber. I work for Google in Mountain View, California, and I manage the Chrome mobile team.
Okay.
Oh.
My name is Eli Fidler, and I'm the architect of the web platform at RIM. So I'm working on all of the web stuff that ends up on BlackBerry devices.
I'm going to throw in my first jargon alert here, actually, because it'll be the first of many, I'm sure. RIM and BlackBerry, are these terms interchangeable? What's the difference? Is one a subset of the other?
Research in Motion is the company, BlackBerry is the brand, but we call ourselves BlackBerry pretty much everywhere.
Okay. So yeah, they are interchangeable. Okay.
My name is Andrea Trasatti. I work for Nokia. I'm a web evangelist, and I'm based in Boston, so very close to our R&D team that develops the browser, and I talk to developers and then bring back the feedback to the company.
Hi everyone, I'm Andreas Bovens. I work for Opera Software, where I'm group lead of developer relations. So I have a team going to conferences, doing a lot of presentations and writing articles and stuff like that about web standards. And we also deal a lot with site compatibility, try to make the web work everywhere. So
what's your day-to-day day like? Is it getting up in the morning, writing articles, getting talks ready?
It depends a little bit on, well, sort of the article writing is very, it's closely connected to releases. So when we have a new product coming out, Opera Mobile, for instance, a new version, we try to see what is new and try to write about the standards that ship in it. Sometimes, you know, when there's no release, there's more focus on site compatibility, or we'll be going to conferences to give presentations. So it depends a bit from week to week. It always changes, but well, Opera has a lot of products, so it's always fairly busy. Okay. And what about you, Andrew? What do you? I mean, your day-to-day sort of work.
So yeah, part of it is writing some articles here and there. Most of it is basically keeping an eye on what are the web technologies that are interesting for developers, and try to basically sell some of the ideas to our internal teams, so our product managers. And
so you kind of like goofing around on the internet and seeing what's
yeah, of course.
That sounds a lot like my
RSS
day.
feeds all day, pretty much. Twitter.
Now, okay, last year when you were here, we established something pretty early on. Last year, it wasn't long after the news that Nokia was going to be shipping Windows Phone 7 on their phones, and so therefore Internet Explorer was going to be a browser on a Nokia phone, and that's nothing to do with you. Correct. But last year you were working on MeeGo, and that's dead now, right?
Well, we're still selling the devices, and we actually delivered an update, including updates to the browser, maybe a month ago. So the development is still happening, and that browser is developed on top of Qt WebKit, and we're still working on that. So the whole Qt development is still ongoing, and Qt WebKit is part of it.
Okay. It's a nice device. I got one just last week for my device lab, and it's very cute. I love the squircles. I'm coining that phrase for not quite square, not quite circles, squircles. But you work on, and then this will be the second bit of jargon.
Well, I am part of the browser team that works on the WebKit browser, the Qt WebKit part. And then what used to be called Ovi browser is now consolidated, at least from a branding perspective, into Nokia browser. But the technology remains a proxy
Were you
browser.
talking to the same branding guys at RIM/BlackBerry when you came up with that?
I think they are the same guys getting twice the salary.
I hope they're winning awards. Okay, so what was the browser formerly known as Ovi is one of these proxy browsers.
Correct.
But that's not what you work on directly.
Not directly, but of course, being same company and doing browsers, we talk a lot. So we meet like once a month, for example, because they are in a different site.
Okay, so there is some liaison between them.
Yes,
you
definitely.
do talk to each other.
Yes.
Now, Arnaud, this time last year, as regards Google and browsers, it was Android all the way. Now, that is changing, and we're getting Chrome. I mean, we kind of knew this was coming anyway, but we are getting Chrome on mobile.
That's right. Chrome Mobile is not Chrome Lite. Chrome Mobile is a full Chrome system with its multiprocessor architecture and basically the same stack.
Well, you see, Microsoft said that too about Internet Explorer. They said it's exactly the same on mobile as on the desktop. Oh yeah, web fonts. No, it supports web fonts, just only the ones that are installed on your phone. Yeah. So when you say it's exactly the same, you'll forgive me if I take it with a pinch of salt.
What I mean by this is, for example, if a web page crashes, which it will eventually, the browser doesn't crash, just like Chrome Desktop. Because of the multiprocessor architecture. Now, of course, if you think about HTML5 support, if you think about tags, our goal is to have a platform which is consistent between devices, whether it's desktop or mobile. But, life is complicated.
Yeah, life is complicated. Yeah. So, Eli, tell me about your day-to-day role, generally.
I spend about half of my time coding, and I spend about half of my time designing what other people are supposed to code, and I spend the other half of my time talking to developers about what they want me to code. Okay.
And presumably you're working on the latest BlackBerry browsers. And
I spend most of my time working on BlackBerry 10, which we just gave the first public view of last week, but that platform is definitely well on the way, and web is a huge focus.
Because I remember last you were talking about how to deal with older devices, and this was 12 months ago, because we still kind of had to think about the pre-WebKit BlackBerry stuff. We were talking about the idea of what does end of life mean, but is that now very much done, end of life?
There's still some updates going out for BlackBerry 7, which was the last release of the Java platform. But in general, I mean, we're starting to see our market move much towards the newer devices. And when BlackBerry 10 launches, that's going to be pretty much the focus of the company.
Okay, and that's a cut-off point. You won't be answering the phone for people with support questions.
I can't say whether we'll be answering the phone, but it's definitely the development focus.
Now, speaking of updates, Arnaud, I've got a question for you. One of the great things about Chrome on the desktop is auto-updating. Will it be like that on mobile?
Yeah, very good question. So auto-update is one of the core features of Chrome.
Yes.
And clearly, that's what we want for Chrome Mobile. The Play Store today supports auto-update. However, users have to accept and select it. And we're working on the Android team to see if we could go just a little further than that and make that a default. But certainly, we want to have one binary of Chrome Mobile and have that update as frequently as possible. We cannot have like very old deployment out there.
But this is going to be a bit of a problem for mobile, isn't it? Because of people's data plans, it's going to cost.
That's
money.
right. So the Play Store already support, I believe, a way to update application only when the device is connected to Wi-Fi.
Oh, so it has some way of knowing what kind of connection you've got.
And then
Wow,
so user can say, I want to update with Wi-Fi, and when they go to a Wi-Fi connectivity, then the update is taking place.
I hope that will be exposed to web pages as well, so that we could make decisions based on the connection. I hope that works out, because it's kind of a bit of a Tower of Babel with Android right now, and we're having to deal with quite old versions, which I'm sure you're not happy about either, right? Do you have any idea of the timeline of when you will see things move away from the Android browser and Chrome all the way?
Yeah, I cannot obviously comment about this exactly in glory details, but obviously the Android browser and the Chrome team are working together. In fact, we've been working together for a really long time. I mean, understand that if you consider the Android browser, it's the same network stack, for example, it's the same V8 JavaScript engine, and so we continue to work together, and the future is Chrome, clearly. Okay.
And again, you have different people in Google talking to each other. You're not completely, there isn't like the Chrome team here and the Android team.
Okay, so just so everybody knows, Chrome for Android is roughly half Android and half Chrome.
Okay.
So we're talking about engineer reporting to Android versus engineer reporting to Chrome product area.
Okay, that's cool. There's something struck me earlier listening to Horace's keynote when he was describing the way that the various browser makers, but more importantly device makers, are trying to take on the incumbent. And the incumbent would be Apple, certainly for mindshare. And most seem to be going head on, right? Trying to compete on the same kind of features, trying to compete on speed, on all this kind of stuff. And he was pointing out that what you actually want to do is kind of come at it from a different angle, where the competitor doesn't even realize that they're being attacked, almost like a flanking maneuver. And I was trying to think if there were such a flanking maneuver for browsers. And the only thing I could think of in a way was this idea of proxy browsers. That's clearly not something Apple's interested in. I presume it's not something that Google's interested in. But it's something Opera's been doing for quite a while. Can you explain, first of all, why do you do that? Why have a proxy browser?
Okay, so I'm not sure. It dates back until the middle of the 2000s, I believe 2006 or thereabout. It was before my time when I joined Opera. I joined Opera in 2007, and Opera Mini was already around. So what we were trying to do is how do we bring the mobile web to feature phones, and then a heavy part is that the full rendering engine has to live on the phone in a traditional sort of browser internet setup, and so we saw that that was not possible. Feature phones were not capable enough to run anything at all. Actually, the only programming language you could use was J2ME, so you had to develop something in that. And so what we made was we made the render. So we installed the browser on our servers. We added a lot of servers there. All the rendering happens there, and then to the client is sent something that we call OBML, which was actually a joke by the engineers, Opera Binary Markup Language. But then the marketing guy said, hey, that's great, and they didn't get the joke, so it became OBML.
And this is the same marketing guys that called it Opera Mini, while you also had a browser called Opera Mobile.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
I'm seeing a trend here with the marketing.
Yeah, anyways, so I don't think it's the same team, actually. Okay. So OBML is sent to the client. It's a mix of text, positioning, data. It's not really bitmaps only. It's text, like you can select it and click on it and so on, and copy-paste it to other applications. And so the rendering happens on the client side. It's great because it speeds things up, and you can actually bring sort of an acceptable experience to feature phones. The interesting thing then is when smartphones came along, we saw people actually still using Opera Mini, even on their smartphones, because of the speed, because they just need something light, they need to load a web page. And so there is actually a use case that goes beyond feature phones into smartphones and even tablets.
And this is in, I guess, territories where you would really pay through the nose for data.
Yeah, exactly. So you can save bandwidth and cost, of course. So this has been growing. Why we did it? I think it's because it makes sense and because it was, targeting a segment of people that was not using the internet before and that now can use it.
It all gets a bit Inception-like for me, this thought of there's a browser on the server and then you have this browser that takes the page that's been rendered by a browser on the server. That browser on the server, what user agent is that?
It has a user agent which is similar to other Opera user agents. It just says Opera Mini. So
Okay.
it
But I mean,
fetches-
there's an underlying rendering engine under the hood of that. What is it? Is it the same?
That is exactly the
Same way.
same as we ship on desktop. So it's perfectly the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's taken me
So-
a year, but I'm getting my head around this stuff.
So the problem is that it comes with some limitations with regards to JavaScript, and sort of round trips and animations are not supported. But yeah, for a lot of web pages you don't need those, so it functions fine or well enough for the user.
Right. And so, Andrea, you were saying that the browser formerly known as Ovi, now brilliantly termed Nokia browser, basically does the same thing.
Yeah, the concept is exactly the same. So in our case, we use Gecko on the server side, and pretty much like Opera, we have server farms in 3 countries, actually, in our case, where the page is rendered, the JavaScript is executed, the styles are applied, and then we just deliver an image, basically a bitmap, to the client. And then the client, all the client has to do is pan around and zoom in and zoom out. And that saves a lot of bandwidth and processing power.
And did that resonate with you this morning when Horace was talking about that? Instead of trying to take on your competitor head on with trying to be a better smartphone browser, trying to be more features, that you actually come at an angle that the incumbent just isn't interested in?
Yeah, I think that the proxy browser tackles different issues, which are bandwidth and cost and speed, and sometimes network reliability. It works better because where you have flaky networks, if you're fetching a lot of small images, it will work. You might have problems. You might have 3 images didn't download. With the proxy browser, you have a more reliable network, and we try to be closer. Within the region, even if the website is in the US, the person is in Singapore, he will get delivered the content from a closer server farm.
I guess we need to be careful here, though, about not sending the wrong message to developers. We're not saying, hey, don't worry about whether having large files and lots of different files being downloaded, because the people who care about that can just install Opera Mini or Nokia browser, right? We don't want to send that message out.
No. And of course, even if the proxy might be connected to a fast network, if the website is faster to deliver and if the markup is done right and everything, then the server itself will process it better and, more efficiently.
Okay. But so you were talking about what you do in your day-to-day life, and I was trying to get my head around all the various Nokia jargon things. You've got the Nokia browser, you've got Migo, and there's Internet Explorer basically on the phone. You're nothing to do with that. It's nothing to do with you.
Right.
What's with Tizen/Tizen, or whatever we're going to call it?
Well,
Tizen?
We don't do anything with that anymore. It's a project now managed by Samsung and Intel. As far as I know, it's still based on a lot of the same technologies that Migo was relying on. I think they still use Qt WebKit as their rendering engine, but that's about it. I mean, what you can see on their website that has been open sourced is the same as much as I know.
Okay, fine. That's good. Just wanted to clear that up. Again, going back to Horace's keynote, there was a lot of facts and figures about hardware, about the devices and the device manufacturers, which I got to admit, I never really cared about hardware, whether it's on mobile or desktop or anything. And from your perspective, Andreas, is that how you think too? Because you're in an unusual position here that you have a browser from multiple devices, as in multiple companies, hardware companies. Why should we care about the hardware? Shouldn't it be that it's about the browser, not the hardware? In the same way on a desktop, I don't care what brand of computer you're using, whether it's a Dell laptop or whoever else makes laptops.
Yeah, I think we try to bring our product to as many platforms as possible, in as far as it makes sense. And sometimes we also have our engineers are actually quite enthusiastic. For instance, I know that we made a special labs version for Migo, which is sort of just because we could and because it was easy. So it's the code is really easily portable. Of course, we have to pay a lot of attention to hardware because the browser has to run. But we also think that developers should be able to not bother too much with it and be able to run just web pages everywhere. Of course, as we've seen from Jason's presentation earlier, the TVs come with certain constraints and huge screens and lots of pixels and other things. So in reality, you will have to still keep this a bit in mind. And of course, then there are also the feature phones that ship with Opera Mini, for instance, and where you'll have a more limited experience, simply because the phone cannot be as fast as you would want to. Yeah.
Okay, so while we're on the subject of the multitude, not only of devices out there, but also browser versions and stuff, testing. We talked about testing last year. It became a hot topic. I want to know what you guys can give us as developers. Now, Remy's going to be talking tomorrow a bit about debugging, and that's also something I'd like to know what you can offer us. So in terms of testing, maybe Eli, you'd like to tell us what have we got to test on? We want to make sure our websites look good on BlackBerry devices.
Well, we try to give out as much information as we can about the market share of various BlackBerry OS versions.
So that's to help us decide what to buy.
So you can make a decision.
Yeah.
And with everything since BlackBerry 6, we have at least a fairly high baseline of being WebKit-based. But as much as I can, I try to put devices in developers' hands. And we have simulators and the same thing that everybody provides to their developers so that you can cheaply get access to these things, but at the end of the day, there's nothing like having a device in your hand. So we are trying to aggressively give away as many devices as we can. And with BlackBerry 10, we have now specially built development alpha devices to put in developers' hands as much as we possibly can to make sure that they can test on the real hardware.
Okay, that's good. So you readily acknowledge that emulators are okay, but they're no substitute for the real thing.
I never use emulators.
Cool. Okay. Good to hear that. I don't know. How about you? In terms of letting us know what we could be testing on, what we should be testing on, got any tools we can use?
Yeah. So first of all, I completely agree with Eli that testing on a real device is really important. Emulator can only go, so far. If you do use Chrome for Android on Ice Cream Sandwich, you can use the Web Inspector functionality. So basically, you can attach from Chrome Desktop to the live phone and then poke the DOM, profile request, and understand where the time is going, understand why something is not displaying, and so forth.
It's a lot like Adobe Shadow in that way.
I'm not familiar with that Adobe product, so
okay.
I cannot really comment. But definitely, it's all about understanding your JavaScript, your DOM, and being able to profile to understand where the time is going when your page is loading.
Okay, that sounds handy. You do have an emulator, which, I mean, in your case, you kind of have to, because you don't provide devices in the sense of you don't make devices.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't make devices. So our best option is an emulator. It's important to test on real devices as well. But I think I would dare to say that our emulator is quite good, as in very good, and it's literally the same version of Opera Mobile that runs on your phone that runs on the desktop, be it Mac, Windows, or Linux. So there's no sort of complex SDKs or other virtual images or whatever you have to install that'll impact then whatever
you do get
runs
to
it.
choose which device you want to pretend.
Yeah, so you can it spawns sort of an overview of what are the device settings you can define all kinds of things, pixel density, screen size, and so on, or choose from one of the preset profiles, and then it spawns separate Opera Mobile instances on your desktop. The only thing you cannot see immediately is, for instance, if the pixel density on your computer screen is different from your phone. So if you sort of define touchable areas, you have to be careful because putting your thumb on your computer screen is not the same as on your phone, right? So there's a couple of things there, but even there we have some command line hooks that give you a better feel of what it really looks like. We also have Opera Dragonfly that can connect to via remote debugging protocol to Opera Mobile instances on the phone or in the emulator, as long as you're running, well, in case of the emulator, on the same computer or on the same local network for the phone.
And Andrea, in terms of getting devices into the hands of developers?
Well, yeah, so at times we deliver devices, like at conferences, it does happen. It's usually connected to some events.
Do you then come and take them away again and change the name when the branding team decides it's going to be called something else?
No, usually not.
Okay.
But at events like here at Mobilism, we try to give away devices as much as Rim and the other guys are doing.
That is great. I mean, supporting that, and that is definitely to be applauded.
Yeah,
That's great
so
that you guys.
That is one of the things that we do, and then we have remote device access, where you can test remotely a device. It's a real device, although it's a remote connection. It is a real device, and we have pretty much all families of devices that Nokia sells. So you have
this
a
one where
wide
you have
range.
to book time, kind of like I
Yeah,
want to test.
you have to book time, but it's free. You just have to go in and find the device that you need, and most of the times you don't have a queue that is longer than 30 minutes or something.
Wow, it sounds completely painless.
It's beautiful.
Jeremy, if I might also, I mean, we talked a little bit about
That was sarcasm, by the way.
device simulators not being that useful. We do have a tool we call Ripple on the development side, which is a Chrome plugin that emulates mobile environments. It is not BlackBerry specific, but it emulates things like device resolution and also a lot of device API stuff for packaged up web apps. So when you're building a PhoneGap or a Cordova application and you want device APIs like contacts, Ripple provides a way of simulating those exact APIs.
And that's a plugin that you install?
It's implemented. Ripple is implemented as a Chrome plugin.
Okay.
And it has drop-downs. You can pick lots of different devices, not just BlackBerry devices, lots of different runtimes, not just Cordova.
Okay.
And it's an open source tool.
Yeah, that's good. Emulators are all good. I shouldn't take the piss. But as you say, there's nothing like getting devices in the hands of people. I remember last year when it got to the Q&A, the panel, Liza jumped up and said, we need to get the devices into the hands of people. And in Portland, Jason and Liza have been getting a testing lab together, a sort of communal testing lab together. And actually, just last week in Brighton, I decided, because we had a few devices lying around in the office at Clearleft, I thought, it's kind of a shame that they're just sitting there on the table when they're not being used. So I said, hey, anybody who wants to come around, use our Wi-Fi, test on these devices, go ahead and do it. And what I didn't expect was after blogging this and tweeting this, other people in Brighton went, oh, I've got some devices. Remy said, hey, I'll swing by with some of these devices I've got. And I was like, wow, awesome. And it has essentially turned into this communal testing lab. If you see community sort of driven initiatives like that, are you willing to get behind that and say that's where we should be sending our devices?
Well, since
People
you're
who make
staring at
devices?
me, sure.
I'm staring at the people who make devices, basically.
Yeah.
Because I understand your position. You can't send a device to every developer.
Yes.
Right, so you want to try and maximize the usefulness of a device. So it seemed to make sense that these kind of communal testing libraries would be a good place to send some. So I'll give you the address later.
We send our developer relations team with devices to lots of hackathons and meetups all over the world. And we also have our BlackBerry 10 Jam Roadshow that's going around and doing events all over the world to try to get devices in people's hands as much as possible.
Okay, good. The problem with that is it can sometimes be preaching to the converted, and what you really want to do is get them into the hands of the people who aren't now testing.
Well, the hackathons and meetups that we go to are not necessarily BlackBerry hackathons
good.
and meetups.
Good. Actually, Andreas, question for you, because when it comes to testing, it sounds like you got these great tools, but we don't actually need to test on Opera, right? As long as it works in WebKit.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I'll explain. If I'm using a --WebKit prefix, Opera is going to execute that?
In some cases, we might, yes. So, a little bit of background. Shall I? Yes.
Go for it, Andreas. Go for it.
So, a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, actually, this was brought up in the CSS working group, and 2 weeks ago, I think, we released an experimental build with support for selected -WebKit -CSS properties. Usually, you would use -O- to prefix or maybe even no prefix for a bunch of these. But we found through testing and also from user feedback that a number of sites, especially on mobile, are not using all prefixes and they just stick to -WebKit- and be done with it. This is because of a number of reasons. It's maybe because the vendor prefix system as it is today is a little bit broken. It is unclear to developers what they have to do. Should you include everything? Should you include just the ones you've tested? Should you include unprefixed versions? And so on. So that is not entirely clear. And also, there are no clear guidelines for browsers either. And sort of it's a whole, there's a whole lot of confusion. And there's a lot of sort of bad examples on the web that just say, oh, if you want this fancy effect, here, copy-paste this code. So we see a lot of copy-paste. And so I think throughout the last year, we've been trying to look at, okay, what are some of the things that are these kind of copy-paste errors? For instance, we found that a lot of people use semicolons in the viewport meta tag values. So that is not officially supported, but if you say, okay, we do not support it as delimiters, you have to have commas, otherwise we don't, show your content as you intended, then a lot of websites would break. So we said, okay, we'll add support.
That's Pastel's law, basically.
Exactly,
being
pragmatic. And yeah, so we also saw the same with broken XML that we were served. So we said, okay, if we are served broken XML, we will reparse immediately as HTML. And it's a little bit of a cheat, but at the same time it works. Users are happy and everything is fine. So we thought the same thing about vendor prefixes. So we will interpret, or well, right now it's a test version, but we're strongly considering to interpret -WebKit- for, I believe, transitions, transforms, border radius, box shadow, and linear gradients.
Now you see, in the case of something like linear gradients, one of your employees, Bruce Lawson, made a very good case for why that would need to be done, because if you're just using -WebKit, it would be possible you'd end up with white text on a white background. And only WebKit browsers will get white text on a gradient background, for example. So there's active harm being done there, and I can understand why Opera felt the need to implement -WebKit gradients. Border radius, really? Rounded corners?
Yeah. The reason is, so we did a bit of research. We looked at what were the worst offenders. I think box shadow and border radius were among those. That was not the only reason why we decided to do this. It's also because if you look at, well, there's a good reason why web developers are excited about border radius and box shadow, is because it allows you to create really nice designs and sort of guide the user's eyes over content more easily, soften it, and sort of draw attention to what needs to be drawn attention to, or say, give a button rounded corners and a drop shadow when it's not clicked.
It's not exactly breaking the web if it doesn't have rounded corners.
Well, but it really impacts usability in a strong way. I've
spent the last 10 years telling people the websites do not need to look the same in every browser, and you're now basically saying they do actually.
No, that's. But we have bug reports actually from users saying like, why does Twitter not show border radius in the corners? So there were like 4 border radius on the old Twitter layout. So there were really people annoyed by this and sort of saying that they got a better experience in other browsers, so that was easier to use.
But I mean, if you love WebKit so much, why don't you marry it? Why have a separate rendering engine?
No, well, we still believe that Presto is better than WebKit, and that's what we want to go for.
Okay, but you're going to imitate WebKit in certain areas.
Well, it's sort of, as I said, so it's to be compatible with the web as it is. We see this, of course, as a problem. We don't want this to stay like it is. Hopefully we can retire it one day. And actually, as part of the... So we're not only doing this, there's also been a new proposal from last week, I believe it was posted by Florian Rivoil, our representative to the CSS working group. So the idea there is, I'll explain it in 2 sentences, to have both the unprefixed to have browsers both support the unprefixed version and a prefixed version. Developers could just use the unprefixed version everywhere, so say transitions, and it would work everywhere. And if you see there is a special layout bug or some pixel pushing that you want to do, you can define a line, say -o dash or -WebKit transition and blah blah blah, and you write your fix basically as an extra and use the prefix for that. And then after a while we can retire the prefixes. Not too much will break. Hopefully all implementations will align and we don't have this breakage anymore. So we're trying both the pragmatic approach like we're doing with this -WebKit implementation, but also try to push the web forward to a better solution that is well defined for both authors and W3C and browser makers.
Okay, I know that does seem like a sensible solution. I did see that email, but I was kind of being facetious when I said, why not just switch over to WebKit? But there are developers who do seem to see the diversity of rendering engines as a bug rather than a feature of the web. I'm not one of them. I actually think it's very, very, very important that we have competing browsers and competing rendering engines, because we lived through the first browser war. We remember what monopolies look like. I take it you obviously think it's healthy to have multiple systems, but for the people who have WebKit in their browsers, do you think it would actually be a better world if everybody decided to use WebKit of some form?
I would say no. I support the existence of multiple browsers certainly out there, and I think it's been made much more clear over the last year by lots of people that there is no one WebKit. So just because we're backed by WebKit doesn't mean that sites will necessarily be exactly the same as on Android WebKit or on iOS WebKit because of various decisions that people have made. But the bar for the kind of thing that works everywhere is much higher among WebKit browsers for exactly things like vendor prefix reasons. I mean, the vendor prefix debate kind of blew up a bit and created a bit of a storm, but there are lots of site compatibility issues that are similar. Right? Lots of people still out there detect user agents and send really bad content to certain user agents, even though they can support better content, which is the generic problem that Opera is having with vendor prefixes
but I mean,
here.
the user agent space has been so poisoned for years. It doesn't matter if you piss in that a bit more. But at least on the client side, we've in theory had standards that we could work to, and now that's being pissed on a bit, which is kind of a shame. Like I said, I don't care what you do with user agent strings. That ship has sailed.
But it's the same problem. The fact that you're detecting the user agent on the server or the client and sending content that is worse than the best that this could be compatible with is the same problem, whether you're talking about vendor prefixes or user agent detection or anything else, any modernizer test that you run.
So the fundamental issue here is coding for specific browsers rather than coding to the web.
Right.
Would you go along with that, Arnaud, that you would not encourage people to code specifically for your browser?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were talking about monopoly and the first browser war. We don't want a monopoly on rendering engine. We want innovation, and we want advanced rendering engine showing up and changing the web.
Just like we've got innovation in the design of mobile phones, thanks to the iPhone. They all look so different these days. I want to talk about how you guys decide to prioritize features. I'm imagining you've got some sort of dartboard with features written on them, and you take a dart and throw it at the dartboard and say, all right, today we're going to start working on this API. Set me right if that's not how you decide how to prioritize features. James spoke earlier about the core mobile web platform community group at the W3C, and he said, and I quote, that they are championing the voice of mobile web developers, as long as you agree with their definition of a baseline support for the mobile web. Is it those guys you turn to for what features to support? Core Mob, is that where you get your...
Well, Core Mob is new, so... But anyway, I think it's always a combination of what the developers need, what we see is needed on the web, like what the trends are, and then of course on the other side is what is the platform underlying the browser is offering and what are the features. So
what the hardware can give you.
Yes, exactly. So there's no point in implementing the accelerometer in the browser if there's no accelerometer in the device. So,
okay.
In the Series 40 devices, you might never see that.
But when you've got tools like Ringmark, that's all about kind of showing what browsers do and don't support. Do you look at that and go, we need to get our Ringmark number up?
Well, it's not about Ringmark specifically or another test suite. It's again, what we see as useful, what the W3C and other standard bodies are promoting, and what we see is useful also with when you're talking about accessibility or local laws. In some countries you might have specific requirements, say around privacy, so you might have suddenly a privacy feature in your browser that is more important than a JavaScript event, because otherwise you're not allowed to legally sell a device in a certain country. So it's a combination.
That.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. You have to, otherwise you won't be able to sell it. So it's a lot of things that we need to look at. So Core Mob can be one, and there are many others.
Okay, and Andreas, because you have essentially the same code base, right, for desktop and mobile. Yep. When you're deciding what features to prioritize, it's got to balance that as well.
Yeah, we look, of course, at what people are doing on mobile, on desktop, on TV as well. So we sort of combine all those requirements. I'm sitting basically together with the guys working on the Presto engine, so we are very much in touch and talk all the time, basically. I believe every 2 to 3 months, there's sort of a review of the roadmap of everything we said we were going to do, and then see how it's working out and sort of look at new trends. So we follow closely what is said on Twitter, what is said on various standards bodies, what we see people using or being excited about, cool new demos that come up, things like that. And so we collect that and make a list and tell our core team, this is our recommendation, we should prioritize this, and this can be down prioritized because actually it seemed like a big deal a couple months ago, but less now. So let's take this instead, and so on.
So where can we see this roadmap?
This is internally.
See, that's problematic.
But we do talk about it.
Yeah.
And we tell, typically stuff that is in standards bodies, in W3C, new CSS specifications and so on that are being worked on, you can safely assume that once it reaches a certain level of maturity and sort of we've been participating in the discussions and so on, that it will land soon in our browser.
Mozilla has a wiki.
Yes.
Just saying, you can just see exactly what they plan to work on. But what about with Chrome? Again, the same thing. It's desktop and mobile. Do you also basically check Twitter to see what's trending and decide to support those features?
No, not really. We just have a whiteboard with a bunch of post-it notes and we move them around. No, seriously, I think it's a very hard problem. You have a very large number of signals throughout the web, through developer relations, through organizations, and we have to decide what's the most important. I think what really worked well for Chrome is to release new browsers very frequently. So at least we can move forward really quickly.
Okay, so just implement everything.
No, implement what matters, but release frequently so people can start to benefit from it soon. And so we can have a good feedback loop and know what to improve quickly.
And Eli, do you look at what developers are asking for, or do you go to actual websites that are already made and see what's not working?
We do all of those things. I think also something we pursue pretty aggressively is consensus in the WebKit community. So most of the big players, at least in the WebKit space, are active in the upstream WebKit project, and sometimes people fundamentally object to the way that some standards are going or the way that some de facto standards are going, and it's harder to convince the community that those are a good idea long term. But in general, the WebKit project is probably the definitive source of innovation for a lot of these things, at least among mobile browsers.
So if there's a feature we want to see supported, do we file a bug with WebKit? Generally, is that a good way of getting...
Yeah, hopefully it comes with a patch.
Right, excellent. And then Opera will copy that soon afterwards. And
no, you can also file bugs and feature requests for us.
Okay, good. We can't see a roadmap, but we can file feature requests.
Yes, for sure.
And there could be a lot of wasted effort there, because we could be filing bugs.
We're working on making things more transparent there.
Oh, and you guys?
Yeah, just to add this, we actually look at our bug database extremely seriously, and if you go to new.mcrbug.com, you can just file any bug you want about bug or feature request for Chrome Mobile, and we look at this every day.
Okay, that's cool. Before this panel last week, I wrote a blog post, and I made the shocking decision to open comments to ask people if they had any questions for the panel. And there were some okay ones in there. I wanted to just go through a couple of them with you. Alan Dalton had a good one. He asked about the User Agent Accessibility Guidelines, UAAG 2.0. Guidelines for designing browsers and media players that, quote, lower barriers to web accessibility for people with disabilities. How do mobile browsers makers try to conform to them? Now, you mentioned about laws in different countries and stuff, but do you pay attention to specs like this? I guess this will be the browser equivalent of WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but for the people who make browsers, right?
Yeah, and again, it can be a combination. Sometimes some governments might ask for a specific, recommendation from W3C or other companies, but specifically about the user agent accessibility guidelines. If I'm not mistaken, 2.0 is not a recommendation yet, so it's still 1.0. We're looking into it. Some parts of it are implemented, but I would say mostly not really. There are other NGOs that are looking into this sort of guidelines, and we're talking with them, and I actually checked with my colleague. There's going to be some companies going before the FCC in the US to talk about this sort of guidelines, so we're also following that sort of work.
So you certainly don't treat the W3C as the be-all and end-all of guidelines.
Exactly. So it's not. There are a lot of companies interested in this space and contributing in some form. And some of it can be done in the browser. Some of it relies on the platform. So again, it's a combination of different parts that need to be in place in order for the browser specifically to implement them and offer the feature. Okay. It's something that we're looking into and that we are interested in.
And the rest of you guys, would you say that's the same, that you pay attention to specs like these from W3C, but they're not necessarily going to be the be-all and end-all?
Yes, obviously. I mean, Chrome for Android is a mass consumer product, and obviously accessibility is a very big deal. That said, Chrome Beta is still a beta, and we are adding those features progressively. Like, for example, a few weeks ago, we added support for USB keyboard, which presumably will work with alternate device. And we're going to continue to add more features like that to support accessibility.
Good, good. If I recall rightly, Chrome, even on the desktop, has had issues with some fairly baseline accessibility as a user agent, just exposing that something is clickable or that something is a form field. Very basic stuff like that. So I'm glad to hear that you're paying attention to that stuff. You also...
I mean, that spec specifically, the user agent accessibility guidelines, is about the browser as an application. And all applications on our device have accessibility requirements that often come from the platform. So things like making your font bigger as the Chrome font of all of the applications on the device is certainly something we support in the browser, but it's a platform level functionality. Or inverse rendering, that kind of stuff.
And would you generally view the accessibility issue as more of a platform level thing rather than a browser level?
I would say that accessibility spec is more about application accessibility. There's, of course, web content accessibility, which is a whole separate thing.
Yep.
But that spec is primarily about what do you do in your browser, Chrome.
Okay. So one of the other questions I got on my blog was from Remy. And I kind of want to read the whole thing out in full because it's so awesome. He says, when are we as a web development community going to stop giving Apple a free fucking pass? They're consistently lacking in the open discussion in improving the gateway to the web, the browser. Sure, they landed an impressive mobile browsing experience back when the iPhone launched, and it's a great device. But there's some serious questioning about whether they're purposely cock-blocking web development and purposely hindering our advancement as a web industry. And he goes on to give some examples like WebGL is in mobile Safari, but only available if accessed via a WebView object, not in the real Safari, which is just a WebView, which is very odd. And all sorts of stuff about storage and all this kind of stuff. I love the way he ends it as well, that even the mighty PPK, who tells entire browser vendors, fuck you, doesn't call Apple out, allowing them to slither on. Why is it we continue to allow Apple to get away with it, and can this ever change? Now, I'm guessing none of you are going to have much to say on that. Would anybody like to offer a comment? Look, Opera are involved in a lot of standards. I would say probably more than any browser maker. I see Opera representatives in more working groups. And there are Apple representatives in those working groups, but are you frustrated by the opacity of Apple, the corporation?
Hard to say. We wish it was more open, I guess. Say, for instance, we ship Opera Mini on the iPhone and not Opera Mobile because of certain restrictions and which kind of rendering engines you can run and things like that. So it would be nice if it was more open, I guess. But I have very little insight as anybody else to, why are these decisions taken. For instance, about the WebView, I followed this decision. I cannot draw a parallel to Opera because we're a browser, so we don't have a WebView. We don't have an OS that would have a WebView. So it's quite hard to draw parallels there.
Actually, I thought of another one. You know that really, if you're doing responsive designs, that really annoying bug with Safari where if you're in portrait and then you turn to landscape it zooms out too much? That doesn't happen if you're looking at a web page in a web view. So if you're like in the Twitter app and you click on a link, you can rotate it just fine. It's cock-blocking the web, cock-blocking the web. I mean, for you, Arnaud, it seems like you are maybe more directly going up against Apple in terms of, you got the Android phones, you got Chrome now. It seems that you are going head on. Do you hope to battle them with openness? That maybe you could be different to Apple in the sense that you're going to be much more open about what you've got planned and what you're doing?
I don't know if you're going heads on. We collaborate with Apple as well. It's not like this big fight, Google versus Apple. So
no,
I know that's what you want to hear, but.
But would you, what I'm saying is, isn't it, yes, you're in competition, and is there not an opportunity for competitive advantage here? Apple is a very closed company, that's their culture, and that could be their weakness, and that's something that you guys could capitalize on and be more open.
Honestly, the whole team is heads down trying to build the best possible product.
Okay.
Period. From a rendering engine point of view, from a usability point of view, from collaboration with desktop and so forth. We're not agonizing about how we're going to take down Apple.
Okay, you guys are no fun. I'm going to throw this open to the audience, but before I do that, let me try another question, try and get you, let's have some good, honest opinions here. We've talked about Apple, we've talked about WC3 groups, we've talked about web developers, browser makers. The only person today to really talk about one group is PPK, and he mentioned operators, carriers. And I was actually really disappointed that at the moment that he mentioned carriers, the whole room didn't go, boo, hiss. So I'm going to try now. So we're going to talk about operators. Good. That is the correct response. So the question I have for you guys are, operators, carriers, do you see them as the enemy of the web, the enemy of the internet, or the enemy of humanity? Those are your choices. So who'd like to go first with this one?
What are the options again?
Enemy of the web, enemy of the internet, enemy of humanity. Or are you going to be all lovey-dovey and say, oh no, the operators are great?
Operators are great.
Operators are great, are they?
They're awesome.
You're slipping the money to push the Android phones or the Chrome phones, right? When someone walks into that shop and says, I want an iPhone.
Well, honestly, for us, Chrome for Android is a beta, so we haven't dealt with them yet.
Okay. But you don't want to say anything to jeopardize possible future relations with operators, I guess.
No comment.
No comment? Anybody?
Sure, I'll wade into the dangerous area.
I should point out, we had a little bit of a get-together earlier to discuss the panel. We didn't want to have the panel before the panel, but Eli couldn't make it because he was having a meeting with his patent lawyers. What did you talk about, actually, at that?
No comment.
Okay.
But, we obviously work very closely with a lot of the operators, and there are some operators that are really pushing open web technologies these days, which did kind of surprise me when I found out about these things. But if you look at, for instance, some of the work that Telefonica is doing, a lot of this stuff is based around open web technologies.
So we shouldn't tar them all with the same brush?
I would say so.
Okay, there's such a thing as a good operator, you're claiming?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can we all agree that patents suck? Can we all get on board with that? Give me an example of patents being a useful thing that has helped the web, the internet, or humanity. No, I didn't think so. So we were going to open it up. We have an
operator.
Oh, we have a representative over here. Could someone get a microphone to Daniel, please? Good.
Hi, Dan. Applequist representing the evil operators of the world. My question is actually, I want to step down the protocol stack a little bit, and my question is actually about Speedy. Mm-hmm. Some people might not be aware that, some people might not be aware that Google has reinvented HTTP with a new protocol called Speedy that is already part of Google Chrome and is now part of Firefox as well, and a lot of services are starting to implement Speedy, and I'm just wondering what people's, from Google, I'm wondering what your experience has been with Speedy on mobile, because I think one of the underlying, I'm sorry to be a bit long-winded here, but one of the underlying assumptions about the move to Speedy is that it is more network friendly, and I'm wondering what your real experience has been with that, because I've seen an awful lot of hand waving, but not a lot of hard data on that. And then the other question I have is, what is the rest of the team, what is the rest of the panel's view on Speedy and the kind of deployment goals for Speedy?
It's a very good question. So Speedy, for those of you which are not familiar, is a new protocol that not only is faster, hence its name, but also encrypts everything. So the link is secure. In some cases it's faster, in some cases it's in par. But it's very hard to derive really hard, good data from it because measuring an asynchronous system is very difficult. So it's really depending from website to website. I invite all of you to give it a try and see if it helps on your website or not. So
you think this is something we have to set up on our websites?
Yeah, I believe, so I'm not an expert on this at all, but I believe you can configure a web server to serve the Speedy protocol, and then if you use a browser that supports Speedy, then you can then measure latency and then decide for yourself whether it's a benefit or not.
So in that sense, it's almost like gzipping. It's something you can
Right.
enable on your server, and if the browser supports
Right.
that,
I mean, I believe I've never done it myself, but I believe you enable this on the web server. It's like an option that you add, and then automatically you get the encryption and the speed.
And other opinions on Speedy? Anybody been playing with it?
Sure. We've been playing with it internally. We haven't shipped anything that speaks Speedy yet. But certainly compared to some of the other alternatives that people try to play tricks with in their network stack, like HTTP pipelining, it's a very promising protocol. I don't think that it will become that widespread on the client side until it becomes more widespread on the server side. So people configuring their servers to actually support Speedy is a pretty important step.
So, but it's kind of chicken and an egg situation, right? Why should anybody configure their server until they're...
That's absolutely true. And I mean, you asked for some data, and right now there are not a lot of servers on the internet that provide live sites over Speedy. So we have some data, but not a whole lot.
Just to add about Speedy, just for everyone, it's actually SPDY. So if you look online, it's SPDY.
So if you enable Speedy on Firefox and you use the extension that shows you when you're using Speedy, it's really quite an eye-opener because actually you're using Speedy everywhere on the web. And that's because Google Analytics is everywhere on the web. So
it's not so much about the number of
really
websites.
Interesting.
It's not so much about the number of websites that have Speedy enabled. It's about which websites, and is it the big ones, the big hubs that are doing it. So if we got Facebook and Google and these large sites implementing it, then I guess that counts a lot more than 1,000 small sites implementing it. It does strike me that Speedy is one of those things from Google, again, where you do suffer a lot from the not invented here syndrome. Right, so HTTP, let's invent our own version of that. Or JavaScript, that's a perfectly good client-side scripting language, but no, let's make our own one. We'll call it Dart. And are you going to ship that with Chrome on mobile?
It's a very good question. I don't have. I cannot comment on that at this point.
Okay. When I talked about you talking to other people in Google, do you ever talk to those Dart guys?
Of course.
What are they smoking?
Actually, they're very talented engineers. They're world-class VM expert, and I think Dart's going to be awesome.
Well, I'm looking forward to your version of HTML. Do we have some more questions from the audience? We got a question back there. So we got one back there. Was the first one I saw. We have Matthias coming with a microphone there. Okay.
Hello. I wanted to ask the Google representative, considering that we have more than 300 million Android devices that will never get updated to Ice Cream Sandwich, would you recommend the owners to install Opera Mobile to get a modern mobile web experience?
What do you think the answer is going to be? I think you can install several web browsers. You can continue to use the WebKit browser. I mean, if I read more in your question, I think you might be asking why Chrome on Android is not running on version before Ice Cream Sandwich. The reason there is because Chrome on Android uses GPUs a lot for everything, ranging from the rendering engine to the UI itself. And we had to add some new APIs in the NDK, SDK level, so we can fully take advantage of hardware acceleration. And so that's that.
I think it's actually a really good question because it kind of puts the shoe on the other foot. In the desktop world, you would say, well, Microsoft, wouldn't you tell users to install Google Chrome Frame if they're running an older version of the Windows operating system? And now it's Google being asked, well, wouldn't you recommend that your users install something like Opera Mobile if you truly do care about users having the best experience?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, remember, we build browser for the future. And we have to move forward, we have to innovate. And sadly, sometimes innovation requires new API. I mean, we could not start depending on, like, say, private APIs, for example, or even degrade, because then it would become a maintenance nightmare.
Okay, fair enough. I like that question. Any other questions? We got one down front from Steve.
Just like each browser, to mention one thing that they think this audience is really going to love in your next release.
Okay, let's start on this side with Eli. Straight off the top of your head.
So this being an audience of web developers, I think you're really going to like what we've done with the Inspector and Ripple development tools in BlackBerry 10. Definitely lots of cool new stuff going on there.
Okay, development tools.
So on the Chrome side, I would say, I cannot go in specifics, but I think you'll see more speed, more simplicity, and more security.
Vague, but okay. Andreas?
We've also been working on making it easier to do remote debugging. So one of the features we've added to Dragonfly is that it automatically recognizes other Opera mobile instances on the same mobile network. So you get like a handy drop-down when you can select, okay, I just want to debug this one. So no more going to the command line, finding out your IP address, and then mistyping it 5 times. So that should become much easier, and I think it will make debugging much better.
So that's 2 for debugging tools.
Well, we already had debugging.
It's not a pissing match, okay?
We are looking at 2 things, I would say. So we're continuing 2 for the price of 1.
Choose one.
We're continuing working on WebKit 2, so speed and smoothness of usability, and with speed I mean both rendering and also network optimizations that we're looking into.
See, this is funny, because you were talking earlier about how you decide what to prioritize, what's going to be prioritized in the next release, and you said you listen to what developers want. And yeah, debugging tools, that's good. Speed, no, that's definitely good. But we want access to the device APIs. That is what we need. I've deliberately avoided talking about it much because we've got a whole panel on that tomorrow, strangely devoid of browser representatives, but I hope you guys will be in the audience. But truly, come on, if we are talking here about prioritization of features, what developers want, it's not hard to figure this out. We can tell you what we want. James was shouting it loud and clear in his presentation. We want access to these device APIs. I would love to hear one of you guys say that that's what's coming. Is it security? Is that the big issue that is holding us up, or is it standardization?
In Opera Mobile, the version that's out now, we have implemented get user media support, so you can have access to the camera API. The question was, what was coming up next, right? So I didn't mention this; it's already there. You can already use it. So, yeah, we're looking at other device APIs as well. We added orientation, of course, geolocation has been there for a while, and we're looking at other stuff as well. Definitely in combination with WebGL and what you can do with that. And sort of thinking about augmented reality apps and stuff like that on the phone is very exciting.
Okay, well, good to hear. But yeah, if I were you guys, I would prioritize API access over debugging tools, but that's just me. Do we have some more questions? We did in the second row here. No, Steve, nothing against speed. I'm with you there. That's good.
Hi. First, I'd like to say, please push the CSS grid module. Using floats for layout sucks. And then I have a question regarding the vendor prefixes. Does Opera re-implement the rendering behavior from WebKit, or does it just alias WebKit with -o?
We do aliasing, so we haven't implemented any WebKit-specific behavior, so it's just, just an alias that we do.
In regard to the other question, the grid layout for CSS, that is the great thing about standards. There are so many to choose from. When it comes to layout, you're absolutely right. Floats for layout have just been a hack for years, but we've got multiple things that we could be asking for here. Let's see, we got grids, we got flexbox, regions. I'm sure I'm forgetting. What's the ASCII art one? Is that grid template? Yeah. So yeah, there's what 3-4 different layout specifications currently being discussed. You guys got a preference? Which one you? Or the new Flexbox? I'm foreshadowing Stephen's talk for.
We're also working on new Flexbox, so that will be soon.
Here that Flexbox is winning the battle. Any particular one, or all of them?
No comments, really.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Sorry.
Might as well have Apple up here.
So changing core layout models of CSS is a big deal, which means that these are things that are hard to implement, potentially result in a lot of regressions in the rendering engine. It's not something that you can just like go do in a week.
And I guess there's also potential conflicts. If you implement two different layouts, what happens when a developer uses both at once?
Sure, and there's lots of issues about changing big fundamental things like this. So we really, we're working on the upstream WebKit implementations of some of these things, but I don't think we're going to ship anything before people are pretty happy about the stability of it.
Right.
That said, Flexbox is shipping.
Awesome. So would you say the Flexbox is the most stable?
Well, it was kind of first
Exactly.
the new
But yeah.
layout models.
Okay. So I hope that answers your question. Time to learn some Flexbox. Other questions? Or is the beer time upon us? I can't. I see a hand here. Over here we got one. We'll get to you in just a bit.
So it's kind of along the same lines. Fixed position. It is finally now being implemented, but every browser in a different way, every WebKit in a different way. How much of a problem do you see this as, and what are we going to? How are we going to fix
I'm
this?
getting deja vu here because this came up last year, and we did go through all the multitude of issues there are when you have a fixed position element on a mobile screen, and if your browser does zooming, do you zoom the whole thing? Do you leave the fixed? Am I summarizing correctly? See, I remember all this from last year. It's hard, I think, is the
Yeah, it's hard to find the right implementation for the user, and some, for example, on iOS, some pages it's weird when you zoom in and zoom out, you seem to lose perspective. And then another issue, of course, is performance. Even on iOS, for example, if you scroll fast, you will see that it moves like 1 pixel sometimes, because even on iOS, the GPU can't keep up with scrolling fast, and it's about tiling. We have different panels, basically, where the tiles are placed, and it's not that easy then to keep them all in sync.
So they kind
when
of
some
go
are
weirdly
moving.
out of
Yes.
sync. It's like seeing the glitch in the Matrix.
Yes, and we don't want to do that.
Okay.
'Cause if it breaks.
So actually, quick straw poll. Who has implemented position fixed in Moses?
We have.
Ish. That's pretty good. So it's a year later. We've got some implementations of position fixed.
I mean, something useful to realize is that when you specify fixed positioning, be very cognizant of the performance impact. I mean, this is serious. I mean, you can really define, with the current spec, you can really define something which is impossible to render. And you have to be very careful with those statements.
Okay, fair enough. So it's hard, I think,
Yeah.
is a pretty good point here. Yeah, I was hoping for access to all the device APIs, but hey, partial support for position fixed, that's progress of a kind. Before I get to you, Jason, there's someone back here.
What's your position regarding responsive images, if you're aware of the debate that's going on?
Responsive images, and particularly so, there's a working group, a community group, I should say, at the W3C looking into this. And there's a pretty solid proposal there for a picture element that would gracefully degrade to a regular image, but also allow you to specify different sized images based on media queries, much like the video element in HTML5. That's a possible solution. I want to know if you guys are looking at that. And then there's also the proposal of potentially just using JPEG, progressive JPEG, to kind of tell whether you should be downloading bits of a file, all the file, this kind of stuff. So I guess there's two different things here. There's the format, the image format, which could be something like JPEG, potentially JPEG 2000, and then there's the markup language and the spec, which would be something like the picture element. Is this on your radar at all?
I guess for us, it's on the radar. We're definitely looking into it, and especially also with the proxy technology, it would be interesting to see exactly what to do and how to behave there. We're basically keeping an eye on the user group. We are talking, for example, with some of the guys that are proposing the picture tag. I don't think we have looked into the progressive JPEG yet as a proposal.
Okay, and you guys, is on your radar, heard of this stuff?
We are following the picture element development with a lot of interest.
That's good. I mean, it's kind of a related question, but these kind of community groups, like the Responsive Images community group, are they a good thing for you? Do they save you time because people are hammering stuff out there and really working on it?
I think it's very interesting. Like, it's a sort of turning the W3C process a bit upside down, or sort of it's very refreshing to see this coming from web developers. Sort of getting support from a group of people that are really interested in fixing this problem, and then you see other browser vendors like we've been involved, I think, from the very beginning, and in been giving comments on drafts and stuff like that, and so it's really nice to see this happening. I think in this case, I think it's going to be interesting to find a balance where the overhead is not too much on the developer's shoulder, where he has to think, what do I do with this device pixel ratio and that and that and that and that, and then making mistakes maybe along the way or the wrong assumptions. It's all high school math, but it's easy to sort of miss a zero or do something a little bit wrong there. So I think it will be interesting to see whether sort of the burden is on the user agent who knows already how big it's rendering and how fast the device is and so on, versus the content author or the web developer. And so that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. So it's
So speaking of the responsive images community group, Jason, you had a question, I believe. I say that because Jason's done some superb work regarding responsive images.
And my question actually wasn't about responsive images, but I'm glad somebody else asked that. I was actually just curious, as we've been watching the conversation going on in CoreMob and a lot of the stuff about Opera Mini and proxy browsers and their support for client-side features, like as the devices come down in price, right, like $50 Android devices, $85 devices, this sort of stuff, it seems like the clients are going to get more full-featured. Like, how do you make the transition from a proxy browser where there's no client-side JavaScript or very limited client-side JavaScript to a world? Like, can we get proxy browsers that are better than they are now? Or does it just mean that those people, at some point, the proxy browser ends and they transition, in the case, to Nokia browser, client-side, or Opera Mobile, that sort of stuff?
I think sort of that's what we're thinking of, so that people get used to browsing on a feature phone, and then when they go to a smartphone, they want a similar experience. That's also why they look almost the same. Opera Mini and Opera Mobile, UI-wise, I actually have to always double-check what I'm running, because they look very much the same, and that's because of that reason. That said, Opera Mobile also has something called Turbo, which basically is a bit like Mini, but all the rendering still happens on the phone. The only thing that it does is everything that's not gzipped, it gzips. And all images are converted on the fly on our servers to WebP. So that's Google's image format. And so everything is rendered on the client side. And so we show WebP images. And we found that before we were using JPEGs, but we found that the compression versus size trade-off was much better when using WebP. So that's a little bit halfway between I still want to save data and get the advantages of proxy browsing, but I still want the full browser on my phone.
Yeah, we're looking into similar solutions where we're trying to leverage the proxy that we have and all basically the network activity that we see. And we're looking into similar things like optimizing images, consolidating files, so delivering one CSS file, even if the website may be delivered 3 or 4, gzipping. And another thing that we can do managing client and server is optimizing the network connection between the two based on, changing the TCP headers and size so that it's optimized for whatever network you're on. And I think that drawing the line between it happens on the server or on the client can be tough. On one side, of course, you want to give all the flexibility to the developer, and on the other, you want to give the maximum speed to the user. So we're looking into some ideas around this.
I don't want to sound like a broken record here, for those who remember what records are. But this shouldn't be a problem that should be solved by these guys. This problem should not be being solved by proxy browsers. It's great that they exist. We made this problem as developers. We made web pages that are too big. We've made files that are too large. We've got too many HTTP requests. And I would hope that actually the problem will be solved by us being better at our jobs. I was thinking of writing on my office wall, WWSSD, was what would Steve Souders do? Which I think is a pretty good way to live your life as a web developer. The optimization, it's great that these kind of things exist, but that it should be our job to be optimizing for the web. I think we're pretty close to out of time, actually. So if anybody, one more question, perhaps, if they have a zinger they want to throw out there. Did I see a hand? There is a hand? Oh, yes. All right, last question.
Well, I have a question about the device APIs, and it has something to do with the history of browsers. Back in time of the WML sites, there was a WML script, and in this language there was many of APIs already implemented, like address book access and so on. And now it's a big thing to implement those things which were here, I don't know, 8 years ago or something like that. So I would like to know what is your opinion about it.
That's a good question, because it's kind of calling bullshit on the excuse. Oh, we'd love to implement these APIs, but there's all these security concerns, all of this. We had it 8 years ago in WML.
I think that security is less and less of a concern, because users are getting accustomed to a pop-up or a message that says, do you want to share your location? And I think we've all been educated to, do I want to share my location or contacts with this website? So that's good for us, because it's going to be easier for us to implement certain features. The other side, for example, for us is we want to try to stick to the standards, because in the past we haven't, and all developers were not that happy about it. So now we try to stick to the standards, but then there's a process to go through, and it takes time, unfortunately, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I'd have to correct some of the misperceptions about the way the standards process works, because again, this was brought up earlier today, I think it was in James's talk, that standard bodies get together and they discuss and they come up with a standard, and then the browsers go out and implement it. Bollocks, that's not the way it works. It's very much a dance between implementation and standardization.
Yes, and that's how the W3C is designed, right? And it doesn't become a recommendation until you have a certain number of implementation, and even this changes depending on the recommendation itself. I think that for HTML5 it's 2 implementations, for other recommendations it's 3, so it really depends.
But what I'm saying is you can't pull that card of, oh, we'd love to implement this stuff, but the standard's not ready, because frankly, there's loads of other stuff you're just shipping left, right, and center and saying, there it is, let's standardize this, boom, standardized, right? Oh, XML HTTP request looks great, let's implement that. We'll standardize it later. Now it is standardized, and that's great, but you didn't sit around going, oh, it'd be great if that was standardized, because then we could implement it.
If I may, the flip side is that if you support an API, then you have to support it for the next 20 years.
No,
right?
that's fair
so
enough.
just think about that.
That's fair enough.
I mean, that's a flip side when you actually build the browser.
Okay, and this is actually a really good point to end it, because tomorrow we're going to have a whole nother panel on device APIs without browser representatives, unfortunately. But like I said, I hope you guys will be in the room to potentially answer questions. We're going to go for beer, and somebody will give us details on where we're going. But could you please join me in thanking our panelists from the browser vendors?
So that's it for the talks for today. We're going to have some beer now. Who thinks that's a good idea? Great, there's some enthusiasm here. Good. So I need to thank our sponsors real quick. We've got BlackBerry, Nokia, Intel, Google, HP, Adobe PhoneGap, and Microsoft Internet Explorer. Please give them a warm hand. So I'll see you guys all here tomorrow morning at 9. And if you want to know where it is, it's at the Bierfabrik in exactly the middle. Just open up your badge and you'll see where it is. But if you're lazy like me, there's guys in yellow t-shirts